So picture this. It's the evening of March 24th, 1882. You're sitting in this like crowded gaslit room in Berlin at the Physiological Society.
Oh, setting the scene. I love it.
Right. And a 38-year-old scientist named Robert Koch steps up to the podium. He, sets down his notes, looks out at some of the most brilliant medical minds of the 19th century, and just announces that he's found it.
He really did just drop a bombshell on them.
He did. He announces he has discovered the exact microscopic bacterium that causes tuberculosis. With these incredibly meticulous staining techniques, he proves to the whole world that this terrifying disease, which, by the way, was slaughtering a quarter of the adult population of Europe at the time, wasn't a family curse.
Yeah, or, some hereditary destiny.
Exactly, or a flaw in someone's moral character. It was just a microbe. It was a physical, tangible, beatable thing.
It's honestly hard to overstate the magnitude of that room on that specific night, because Koch essentially takes this this invisible phantom that had been haunting humanity for literally millennia, and he just pins it to a glass slide.
Well, yeah, pinned to a slide.
It's a monumental turning point in human history. I mean, it fundamentally shifted how we understand infectious disease. He eventually wins a Nobel Prize for it.
Which makes sense. So if you're looking back at that moment, you'd naturally think, great, mystery solved, disease conquered, we can all go home.
You would think so.
But if we fast forward, like, over 140 years from that room in Berlin, the picture is grim. I mean, we have antibiotics now. Tuberculosis is entirely preventable.
It is entirely curable, too.
Entirely curable. And yet, the World Health Organization estimates that in 2024 alone, TB killed 1.23 million people worldwide.
It's just staggering.
And it sickened 10.7 million.
To put that 1.23 million in perspective, that's basically the equivalent of a major metropolitan city being completely wiped off the map every single year.
Right.
From a disease we have comprehensively understood and, known how to cure for over half a century.
It is absolutely mind-boggling, and, well, that staggering contradiction is basically our mission for this deep dive into the research today. We're going to unpack the philosophical and scientific mystery of how an ancient, curable disease manages to remain like one of humanity's greatest infectious killers.
Which is quite the mission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to set the stage for you listening. This isn't just some dry medical history timeline. This is a profound exploration of the literal air you breathe. In your office, in your home, on the subway.
It really is.
It's about the hidden architecture of human society.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about what happens when one person's illness becomes a ruthless test for the collective whole.
That framing is just essential. If you look at the core thesis threading through all of the source material, a really glaring truth emerges.
What's that?
Well, tuberculosis is not just a biological pathogen. It's a disease of shared air, of delayed consequences, and of, frankly, social neglect.
Social neglect.
Yeah, it fundamentally shatters the illusion that the human body is a closed fortress. Instead, it reveals that your body is this ecosystem deeply and inevitably connected to the people and the physical infrastructure around it.
Which means, to understand why TB is so incredibly hard to defeat on a societal level, we first kind of have to understand its unique biological patience.
Patience is the perfect word for it.
And patience is a terrifying word to use for a bacterium. So let's look at the microscopic level. What actually is TB? Because it doesn't really operate like the viruses we've become so accustomed to hearing about lately.
Not at all. So tuberculosis is caused by bacteria in the Mycobacterium tuberculosis complex. And the distinction between a virus and a bacterium is really critical here.
Okay, break that down for us.
So a virus, like COVID-19 or the flu, is essentially just a tiny packet of genetic code. It has to invade your cells, hijack your own cellular machinery, and basically force your DNA to rapidly print millions of copies of the virus until the cell bursts.
Right, viruses are hijackers.
Exactly. But Mycobacterium tuberculosis is a living, rod-shaped organism. It doesn't need to hijack your DNA to reproduce. But what makes it so formidable is its evolutionary armor.
Armor, like an actual shell.
Kind of. It has this remarkably thick, waxy, lipid-rich cell wall containing these very complex molecules called mycolic acids.
Waxy armor. So instead of a standard biological cell membrane, it's basically walking around in a microscopic hazmat suit made of fat and wax.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it, yeah. That waxy envelope makes it incredibly tough.
How tough are we talking?
Well, if you think about how the human body normally destroys invaders, using powerful enzymes, localized acidity, oxidative stress. This waxy wall simply repels those
It
attacks.
just bounces right off.
Yeah, it's hydrophobic. It repels water, which means water-soluble antibiotics have a terribly hard time even penetrating it.
Oh, wow. I didn't think about that.
But there's a massive biological trade-off for the bacterium here. Building that complex, heavy, waxy wall requires an immense amount of energy and carbon.
So it sacrifices speed for defense.
Precisely. Because it has to synthesize all these complex lipids, the bacterium is astonishingly slow-growing.
How slow?
Let's compare it to something familiar. A common bacterium like E. coli, which causes food poisoning, can double its population in about 20 minutes. It just floods the zone.
20 minutes, okay?
Mycobacterium tuberculosis takes 18 to 24 hours just to double one single time.
Wait, 24 hours? For one division?
Yep.
Wow. So it is not rushing the gates, it's quietly, methodically setting up camp.
Exactly.
And how does it actually get into the body? We hear so much about, hand washing and surface contact with other diseases, but TB operates on a totally different axis.
Yeah. TB is strictly airborne. It spreads via aerosolized droplet nuclei.
Meaning from coughing.
Right. When someone with active pulmonary TB, meaning the bacteria is actively multiplying in their lungs or throat coughs, speaks, sings, or even just laughs, they release microscopic infectious droplets into the air.
Just from talking or laughing.
Yes, we are not talking about touching a contaminated doorknob or sharing a drinking glass. These particles are tiny, usually between 1 to 5 microns in diameter.
Which is practically invisible.
Completely invisible. And because they're so small and weightless, they don't fall to the ground quickly. They can remain suspended in the indoor air for hours.
Okay, so if someone coughs in a room and leaves, you could walk into that same room an hour later, inhale, and pull the bacteria directly into your system.
Yes, unfortunately. If you walk into a poorly ventilated space and inhale that shared air, those microscopic particles bypass the mucus in your nose, they bypass the cilia in your windpipe, and they travel deep, deep down.
Into the lungs.
Into the terminal branches of your respiratory system, yeah. Right into the tiniest air sacs of your lungs, which are called the alveoli.
And most of the time it stays in the lungs, right? That's what we think of as classic pulmonary TB.
Usually, yes.
But the research points out it can actually go rogue and spread throughout the entire body.
It absolutely can. While the alveoli are ground zero, the bacteria can catch a ride in the bloodstream or the lymphatic system.
Oh, that's not good.
No. They can disseminate to the brain, the spine, the kidneys, the lymph nodes. When it spreads widely like that, it causes severe, sometimes fatal forms of the disease.
Like what?
Well, you can get TB meningitis, where the bacteria inflame the membranes surrounding the brain and spinal cord.
That sounds horrific.
It is. Or you can get miliary TB, which gets its name because if you look at an X-ray or an autopsy, the infected organs look like they've been scattered with tiny millet seeds.
Oh, wow. Literally seeded throughout the organ.
Exactly.
But let's stay in the lungs for a second. The bacteria lands deep in the alveoli. What does the body do? We have an immune system for a reason. Do our white blood cells just sound the alarm and start attacking?
They do, but this is where the biological story gets really wild. Your lungs are patrolled by these specialized immune cells called alveolar macrophages.
Macrophage.
Yeah, and the word macrophage literally means big eater. Think of them as the heavy-duty garbage collectors of the lungs. Their entire job is to ingest foreign invaders, trap them inside a cellular compartment, and then flood that compartment with lethal acid and enzymes to dissolve the threat.
Sounds like a solid defense.
It is. So the macrophage swallows the TB bacterium.
But the TB bacterium is wearing the waxy hazmat suit.
Exactly. The macrophage swallows the bacterium, but the bacterium uses a series of chemical signals to block the macrophage from releasing its acid.
Wait, what?
Yeah. So instead of dying, the TB bacterium comfortably survives inside the very immune cell that was sent to kill it.
That is deeply unsettling. I mean, it gets swallowed by the security guard, disables the guard's weapons from the inside, and then just lives inside the guard.
It is the ultimate Trojan horse. The macrophage is now compromised. And when the broader immune system realizes this initial frontline attack has failed, it initiates a massive secondary response.
Sending in the cavalry.
Precisely. It calls in the complex coordination network of the immune system. T cells, which are basically the generals of the immune response, rush to the site to coordinate the attack.
Oh.
B cells, which produce targeted antibodies, arrive, More macrophages flood in, and they all swarm the infected area to build a highly specialized structure called a granuloma.
A granuloma. Now, this concept comes up constantly in the research. Historically, didn't the scientific community think of the granuloma as a straightforward victory for the body? Like building a prison wall?
Yes, the old textbook view was very static. The assumption was that the immune system couldn't chemically kill the TB, so it opted for physical containment.
Just locking it up.
Right. It walled the bacteria off in this tight, calcified prism, locking the threat away to keep the rest of the body safe. But modern science has completely upended this view.
Really? How so?
Because the granuloma is not a simple passive prison. It's a highly dynamic, intensely contested battlefield.
I picture the human body here like a massive, complex ship.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. If a virus gets on board, it might be like a spill of toxic chemicals on the deck. You can see it, and you can theoretically wipe it up with surface disinfectants. But because TB is airborne and gets into the deep alveoli, it's like a fire generating smoke in the ship's shared ventilation system.
Exactly.
And the immune system rushing in to build this granuloma, it's like the crew desperately welding a heavy steel bulkhead shut to quarantine the smoke and fire into one single compartment of the ship.
That is a brilliant analogy. And just like sealing off a compartment on a ship in the middle of the ocean, the granuloma can sometimes hold perfectly.
The fire stays contained.
Right. The T cells keep the walls reinforced, the bacteria run out of oxygen and enter a dormant state, and the infection is contained. But sometimes the battle inside that granuloma is so fierce that it causes immense localized inflammation.
And what happens then?
The cells in the center of the granuloma die and turn into this soft, cheese-like substance, a process called caseous necrosis.
Ugh. Cheese-like.
Yeah, it's not pretty. If the structure becomes unstable, the granuloma ruptures. It breaches the wall of the airway, dumping this massive payload of actively multiplying bacteria and liquefied tissue directly into the lung cavity.
Oh my God.
Suddenly, the compartment is open, the patient is coughing up blood, and they are transmitting the bacteria back into the shared air.
Okay, but let me challenge that for a moment. Push back on the ship analogy a bit. If my immune system successfully builds this granuloma wall, and it holds, and the fire is completely sealed in the compartment, isn't that a total victory?
It feels like one.
Right. Like, why does the medical community consider this a spectrum of disease rather than just saying, great, you cured yourself?
Because the bacteria are not dead. They are just dormant, operating on a metabolic trickle. This is the crucial difference between active TB disease and what we call latent or inactive TB infection.
Latent TB.
Exactly. If you have latent TB, the granuloma is holding. You have the bacteria in your body, but you have zero symptoms, and you absolutely cannot spread it to anyone else. You feel completely healthy.
Okay, that sounds fine, though.
But, and this is a massive but, the bacteria are biologically patient. They are just waiting for the steel bulkhead to rust.
Waiting for a weakness.
Yes. If your immune system ever weakens, even 30 or 40 years later, due to severe malnutrition, immense stress, aging, diabetes, or another disease that attacks the immune system like HIV,
then the wall breaks.
The granuloma fails, the walls crumble, and the bacteria reactivate.
So you could literally carry this bacterial stowaway below deck for 3 decades, completely unaware, until you get stressed or sick with something else, and suddenly the stowaway burns the ship down.
That is exactly what happens. Without preventative treatment, about 5 to 10% of people who carry a latent TB infection will eventually see it reactivate into active TB disease in their lifetime.
Wow.
And what modern research is illuminating is that this old binary of latent versus active is actually too simplistic. TB is a continuous spectrum. We're now finding people with asymptomatic or subclinical TB.
Wait, what does that mean? Subclinical?
It means they have bacteriologically active disease in their lungs. The bacteria are multiplying. They are potentially contagious, but they don't have the classic symptoms we associate with TB.
Like the coughing and stuff.
Right. They don't have the hacking prolonged cough, the severe weight loss, or those terrifying, drenching night sweats.
That is wild. So they're just walking around their daily lives, going to work, feeling relatively normal.
Huh.
Maybe just thinking they have a mild tickle in their throat.
Yes.
But they are actively exhaling the bacteria into the shared air of their homes and workplaces. The threat is just lingering below deck, completely invisible to everyone, including themselves.
And because it's so incredibly slow, and because the symptoms of active disease can take months or even years to fully materialize and disable a person, it meant that for most of human history, humanity had absolutely no idea what was killing them.
Because the cause and effect were too far apart to connect.
Right.
Which opens up a fascinating and really dark chapter in our history. Because TB is so patient, humanity spent millennia completely misunderstanding it.
Yeah.
And the deep antiquity of this disease is just staggering.
It really is.
Like, the sources note that scientists have found TB DNA in the remains of bison that are 17,000 years old.
Which tells us that this Mycobacterium family has deep, deep evolutionary roots. It's been navigating the mammalian immune system since the Ice Ages.
And as for human beings, they discovered a 9,000-year-old Neolithic settlement off the coast of Israel, a submerged site called Atlit Yam.
Yes.
And in those 9,000-year-old human remains, they found clear skeletal evidence of TB in a mother and child. That time period is critical because 9,000 years ago is right around the time humans were transitioning from nomadic hunter-gatherers to, settling down, domesticating animals, and living in clustered permanent dwellings.
That is exactly the trigger point. TB is a disease of civilization. It flourishes with human settlement.
Because we're all packed together.
Exactly. It thrives when we start sharing indoor air over long periods of time, especially in the winter months. As civilizations grew and densified, TB grew right alongside them.
So what did ancient doctors think it was?
Well, if we look at classical Greece, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, documented it extensively. He called it thesis, which translates roughly to a severe wasting away.
Wasting away.
Yeah. The Greek physicians could observe the end result, the chronic cough, the extreme skeletal weight loss, the physical decline, but they had no concept of an airborne microbe.
Right, no microscopes back then.
So they believed it was a climatic imbalance of the bodily humors, or maybe a constitutional flaw you inherited from your parents.
And then as we move into the Middle Ages, the misconceptions evolve into something even more bizarre. PB of the lymph nodes in the neck, where the lymph nodes would swell enormously and sometimes rupture through the skin, was incredibly common.
Yes.
And they called it scrofula, but it had another name, the king's evil.
Medical history from this era often sounds like high fantasy, to be honest. In England and France, it was a widely and deeply held belief that if you suffered from scrofula, the only way to be cured was to be physically touched by the monarch.
Just touch.
Just touch. This tradition traces back to kings like Clovis in France and Edward the Confessor in England.
The royal touch. I mean, imagine the desperation. People would travel for weeks, line up for miles, suffering from these painful, swollen, infected lymph nodes, just waiting for the king or queen to lightly tap them or give them a special coin.
Yeah.
Believing that the divine right of kings imbued the monarch's hands with antibacterial properties.
It sounds absurd to our modern ears, but it highlights a profound psychological truth about humanity. Immense grief and chronic suffering, when completely divorced from scientific understanding, will always seek patterns, moral reasoning, and supernatural explanations.
Human nature.
It is. Which leads us to perhaps one of the most tragic and deeply misunderstood phenomena in American history.
Oh, the vampire panics.
The vampire panics of early 1800s New England.
This part of the research is astonishing. How did a bacterial lung infection lead communities in Rhode Island and Connecticut to believe in vampires? Like actual vampires.
You really have to put yourself in the shoes of a farmer in Rhode Island in the early 19th century. Imagine your eldest daughter gets sick with a wasting cough. Over a year, she slowly wastes away, grows paler, coughs up blood, and eventually dies.
Horrible.
You bury her. Then, a few months later, your son develops the exact same symptoms. Then your wife starts coughing.
Oh, man.
From your perspective, living in a pre-germ theory world, this doesn't look like an infectious outbreak because outbreaks like cholera or smallpox happen fast.
Right, they sweep through a town in weeks.
Exactly. This slow, methodical decline of one family member after another looks exactly like a family curse. It looks like the first person who died is somehow reaching back from the grave and slowly, night by night, draining the life force out of the rest of the surviving family.
So they literally thought the first victim was feeding on the living.
Yes. And out of pure, desperate grief and a frantic desire to save the remaining children, these communities would go to the graveyard, exhume the body of the first deceased relative, and perform rituals.
Rituals? Like what?
Well, if they found liquid blood in the heart, which is a normal part of decomposition, but they didn't know that, they would cut out the heart, burn it to ashes, and sometimes even mix the ashes in water and feed it to the sick relatives, believing they were destroying a supernatural predator.
That is just heartbreaking. I mean, they were looking at a cluster of airborne transmission occurring within the shared, poorly ventilated air of a crowded winter farmhouse, and their only conceptual framework for understanding it was monsters.
Because a disease, that patient doesn't look like an infection. It looks like a haunting.
A honking.
Yeah. And while New England farmers were exhuming bodies, TB was simultaneously taking a massive civilization-level toll across the rapidly industrializing cities of Europe and North America. In the 19th century, it became known as the White Plague, causing roughly 25% of all deaths in Europe.
1 in 4 people.
1 in 4.
And yet, strangely, there was a massive cultural divergence in how the disease was perceived depending on who you were. While the poor were dying in droves in these crowded, smoke-filled industrial slums, upper-class society started to actively romanticize the disease.
It's so strange.
They called it consumption. It became heavily associated with artistic sensitivity, with poetry, and with delicate, tragic beauty.
It's a very bizarre, almost macabre cultural moment, because TB causes severe weight loss, a pale, translucent complexion, and flushed red cheeks from a constant low-grade fever. The physical manifestation of the disease actually aligned perfectly with the Victorian beauty standards of the time.
So they actually wanted to look like that.
Women literally used makeup to mimic the flushed cheeks and pale skin of a TB patient. It was seen as a tragic, poetic decline, a disease of the soul, afflicting sensitive geniuses like the Bronte sisters or Chopin.
It's like putting a fancy tailored ball gown on an assassin. You're asceticizing the very thing that is slowly eating holes in your lungs.
Which is incredibly dangerous public health messaging. When a society romanticizes a disease, when they tie it to an inescapable melancholic personality trait, they treat it as an inevitable tragedy rather than a public health crisis that demands aggressive intervention.
And this brings us right back to Robert Koch in 1882. He puts the sputum of a TB patient under a microscope, uses his methylene blue stain, and says, look, right there, it's a germ. It's a rod-shaped bacterium.
The proof was finally there.
Exactly. It's not a vampire, it's not a poetic temperament, it's a microbe. But how did society react? Did that instantly stop the romanticizing and the panics overnight?
It fundamentally shifted the scientific paradigm. Koch's discovery yanked tuberculosis out of the realm of morality, magic, and poetry and dropped it squarely into the realm of public health, sanitation, and bacteriology. It definitively proved the disease was infectious.
Right.
But, and this is a crucial historical reality, knowing the biological cause of the disease does not magically provide you with a cure.
You can see the enemy on the slide, but you still don't have a weapon to fight it.
Exactly. And that agonizing gap between Koch identifying the bacterium in 1882 and scientists actually developing an effective antibiotic to kill it in the 1940s lasted for over 60 years.
60 years of knowing what it is, but not being able to stop it.
Yes. And in that massive gap, society had to implement desperate and often highly unequal physical and architectural countermeasures.
Which brings us to the era of the sanatorium. The late 1800s to the mid-1900s, since they couldn't kill the bug, the medical establishment's advice was essentially, you have a lung infection, remove yourself from the city, go rest in the mountains, breathe freezing fresh air, and eat highly nutritious food.
The sanatorium movement, pioneered by people like Edward Trudeau in the Adirondacks, was based entirely on isolation, extreme rest, and nutrition.
Sounds kind of like a spa retreat, honestly.
Well, patients would sit outside on cure chairs in the freezing winter air, bundled in blankets, hoping the fresh air would heal their lungs.
Oh, maybe not a spa.
Right. And for some people, it did work. The rest and good food helped their immune systems finally fortify those granulomas and contain the infection. But it was not a true cure. The bacteria just went latent.
They just pushed it back below deck.
Exactly. And more importantly, the sanatorium era exposed massive, unbridgeable societal fractures.
Because escaping to the fresh mountain air isn't cheap. It requires time and money, two things the working class did not have.
Precisely. Wealthy patients could afford to retreat to a beautiful, specialized cottage in the Swiss Alps or upstate New York for 2 years to recover in peace.
2 years.
Yes, very long stays. But poor patients, the ones who were most vulnerable due to the brutal, exhausting working conditions of the Industrial Revolution, had no such luxury. They often remained trapped in crowded, poorly ventilated tenement slums, coughing in shared, windowless rooms.
Inevitably spreading the disease to their children and spouses. It's that ship metaphor again. The wealthy passengers, when the fire started, got to go up to the top deck where the air was clean and the breeze was fresh. Meanwhile, the poorest crew members were locked down in the engine room, trapped with the smoke, breathing it in day after day.
And while the rich rested, public health officials were frantically trying to find actual medical tools to stop the spread. Finally, in 1921, 2 French scientists, Albert Calmet and Camille Guérin, achieved a breakthrough. They developed a vaccine, the BCG vaccine.
The BCG vaccine. Now, this is a live weakened vaccine, right?
Yeah.
And we actually still use it today.
We do. To create it, Calmette and Guerin took a strain of bovine TB that infects cows, and they cultured it repeatedly over 13 years.
13 years.
Yes, passaging it 230 times on slices of potato and glycerin until it mutated and became too weak to cause disease in humans, but still strong enough to trigger an immune response.
That's incredible dedication.
It is, and today it's widely used in countries with high TB burdens, primarily administered to infants, to protect them from those severe disseminated forms of the disease we discussed earlier, like TB meningitis.
Right, the brain inflammation.
Exactly. But the history of its rollout contains one of the darkest, most devastating chapters in medical history.
The 1930 Lübeck disaster in Germany. Walk us through how a life-saving vaccine rollout turned into a nightmare.
It's incredibly grim. In the city of Lübeck, the health department decided to administer the newly developed oral BCG vaccine to newborns. 251 infants received the vaccine.
Okay.
But tragically, the laboratory preparing the doses had made a catastrophic error. The vaccine cultures were kept in the same incubator as a highly virulent active strain of human tuberculosis.
Oh, no.
The batches were accidentally cross-contaminated. Instead of a weakened vaccine, these infants were fed active lethal TB bacteria. 67 of those infants died of tuberculosis, and many of the others were severely sickened.
That is unimaginably awful. To hand your newborn child over to a doctor for protection and have them accidentally administered a lethal pathogen. It wasn't a flaw in the vaccine's design, it was a catastrophic human lab error. But the psychological impact on the public must have been immense.
It absolutely shattered public trust. It set back vaccine confidence across Europe for years, and it proved, through immense tragedy, that medical interventions require absolute rigor, safety protocols, and transparency.
Naturally.
But the desperation for an actual cure for the infected continued to mount. Finally, the antibiotic revolution arrived. In 1943, a team of scientists at Rutgers University, Selman Waxman, Elizabeth Bogie, and Albert Schatz, discovered a chemical produced by a soil bacterium that could kill TB.
And that was streptomycin.
Yes, they developed streptomycin, the very first effective antibiotic against tuberculosis.
So, 1943. We finally have a weapon that can pierce the waxy armor. The war is over. Did we just blast the bacteria and end the pandemic?
Well, the medical community certainly thought so at first. They gave patients streptomycin, and the initial results looked like a pure miracle.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Patients who were literally on their deathbeds, coughing up blood, suddenly regained their appetite, their fevers dropped, and their lung lesions started to clear.
That sounds like a total victory.
But then, almost as quickly as the miracle occurred, the nightmare returned. The bacteria came roaring back, the patients relapsed, and this time the streptomycin did absolutely nothing.
The bacteria adapted.
The bacteria mutated. Using a single drug to fight TB was a massive, fatal failure. It taught the field of medicine a profound biological lesson that we still rely on today. You cannot fight TB with just one drug.
It's like sending one single security guard to stop a massive, organized riot. The rioters just quickly figure out the guard's specific weakness, bypass him, and continue the destruction.
Exactly. Because of that 18 to 24-hour doubling time and the sheer number of bacteria in a cavity, random genetic mutations naturally occur.
No.
If you only use one drug, you kill the susceptible bacteria, but you leave behind the 1 or 2 mutants that happen to be resistant.
And then they take over.
Those survivors multiply, and suddenly you have a fully resistant strain. To cure TB, you need combination therapy. You have to hit it from multiple chemical angles simultaneously.
How does that work?
You attack cell wall synthesis, you attack the protein production, you attack the energy metabolism all at once, so the bacteria mathematically cannot mutate fast enough to survive all the attacks.
Overwhelming force.
Today, the standard treatment for drug-susceptible TB requires a combination of 4 powerful drugs, typically isoniazid, rifampin, pyrazinamide, and ethambutol. And you don't just take them for a week. You have to take them for a minimum of 4 to 6 months.
4 to 6 months. I mean, we complain about taking a 10-day Z-Pack for a sinus infection.
Yeah.
You have to take multiple heavy-duty pills every single day for half a year. And these drugs have side effects, nausea, fatigue, liver toxicity. But as difficult as the biology of the cure is, the history shows us that the way the cure was delivered sometimes caused immense generational trauma.
It did.
The source material outlines the colonial impact of TB management on indigenous populations in Canada between the 1940s and 1960s. This is incredibly heavy, but vital to understand.
It is a stark, heartbreaking reminder that a cure is only as good and as ethical as the system delivering it. During this mid-century period, TB absolutely devastated First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities across Canada.
Now, why was it so bad there?
Well, this wasn't just some biological accident of geography. It was heavily accelerated by colonial infrastructure. The government's policies of forced relocations to reserves, the crowding of children into poorly ventilated residential schools, and the severe malnutrition caused by disrupting traditional food sources.
That's a perfect storm.
Exactly. These policies created the perfect engineered storm for an airborne disease to rip through a population.
The numbers are staggering. In the 1950s, it's estimated that a third of the entire Inuit population was infected with tuberculosis.
And the government's response was a draconian medical intervention. They sent hospital ships, like the CD Howe, to the Arctic. They would X-ray communities, and if someone showed signs of TB, they were forcefully removed on the spot.
Just taken away.
Just taken. They were sent thousands of miles away to sanatoria in southern Canada. The average stay was 2.5 years.
2.5 years away from home.
Yes. People were completely isolated from their language, their culture, their lands, and their families. Children were ripped from their parents' arms. Patients were given numbered tags instead of names.
That's dehumanizing.
And many never returned, dying in the South and buried in unmarked graves, leaving their families wondering for decades what happened to them.
So the medical establishment was looking at a spreadsheet and saying, we are isolating the infection. We are saving you from the disease. But the method of saving them fundamentally destroyed the community fabric. It's a horrific lesson. Medicine administered without dignity, without consent, and without cultural humanity is just another form of trauma.
It proves that public health cannot operate in a clinical vacuum. We must not only ask, did we kill the bacteria? We must constantly ask, did we preserve the person, the family, and the community in the process?
Because you don't.
Because when a health system violates that trust, the psychological and societal scars last for generations, and it makes people terrified to interact with doctors in the future.
So if we pull back to the present day, we've learned the harsh lessons of single drug resistance. We have combination therapy. We have modern, powerful antibiotics. We know exactly how it transmits. If you are sitting here in the 21st century, shouldn't this entire ancient disease be firmly in the rearview mirror?
You would certainly think so. But the late 20th century proved that TB never truly left us. It was just biding its time, waiting for our guard to drop. If we look at the late 1980s and early 90s, we see the catastrophic rise of the HIV-TB syndemic.
A syndemic, that's a term you hear in epidemiology. It means two epidemics colliding, interacting, and making each other exponentially worse.
Exactly. Let's go back to the biology of the granuloma we discussed earlier. Remember the T cells?
The generals coordinating the prison guards.
Right. They coordinate the macrophages to build and maintain the walls of the granuloma prison. Well, HIV is a virus that specifically targets, infects, and destroys a specific type of T cell called the CD4 T cell.
Oh, so HIV specifically kills the general coordinating the prison guards.
Yes. So suddenly, in the 1980s, millions of people who had latent, sleeping TB infection stowaways they had carried safely for years suddenly lost their immune containment. The CD4 T cells died off. The granulomas crumbled.
The bacteria reactivated.
And TB cases skyrocketed globally.
In the United States alone, from 1985 to 1992, TB cases actually rose by 20%. And it was heavily, devastatingly concentrated in New York City. The statistic in the research is just mind-blowing. In 1990, New York City accounted for only 3% of the total U.S. population, but it had 15% of the country's entire TB cases.
Which perfectly illustrates the next major concept we need to explore: the sociology of shared air. The NYC resurgence wasn't just about HIV. It proved that TB travels on social architecture.
Social architecture.
Yeah. During that period in New York, public health funding for TB control had been drastically slashed. Poverty was rising, the shelter system was overflowing and severely crowded. TB simply waits for infrastructure to fail.
The sociology of shared air. It's a profound way to look at it. We touched on this with the sanatoria, but let's really dig into the mechanics of it. The risk factors for catching and dying from tuberculosis aren't strictly biological, like having diabetes or being undernourished, though those do weaken the immune system. The primary drivers are sociological.
Yes. We have to start viewing air as infrastructure. When urban planners think of infrastructure, they think of concrete roads, steel bridges, and water pipes. But the air circulating through our buildings, our prisons, our factories, and our homes is just as critical.
Right.
Population density alone doesn't cause a TB outbreak. If you have a highly dense city like Tokyo or modern New York, but it have excellent HVAC ventilation, high-quality housing, and fast free access to healthcare, TB struggles to find a foothold.
But if you take away those protections,
Density paired with poverty, broken windows, poor ventilation, and systemic neglect. That is TB's absolute playground.
which is exactly why we see the disease explode in crowded multi-generational housing, in underfunded homeless shelters, in tightly packed prisons, and particularly in war zones.
War zones are terrible for this.
War is the ultimate disease multiplier because it destroys clinics, it cuts off the supply chain for a 6-month course of medication, and it forces desperate people into crowded, unventilated emergency bunkers.
And beyond living conditions, we see severe occupational risks tied directly to labor rights. Take miners, for example, particularly in regions with weak safety regulations.
What happens with miners?
Miners work in deeply enclosed spaces, breathing in silica dust from the rocks. That silica physically damages the macrophages in the lungs, paralyzing the immune defenses, making miners highly susceptible to TB.
Oh, wow. Double hit.
But it goes further than that. If you have an unsafe, precarious labor system where people do not have paid sick leave, what happens when a worker gets a chronic cough?
They keep going to work. You're coughing, you have the low-grade fever, you're losing weight. But if you miss a shift, you can't feed your family or pay rent.
Exactly.
So you force yourself onto the crowded bus, you walk into the factory, and you keep coughing on the job, unknowingly spreading the bacteria to your coworkers.
Poverty forces people to prioritize immediate survival over long-term health. The World Health Organization reports that roughly half of all people treated for TB and their households face what is called catastrophic costs.
Catastrophic costs. That sounds severe.
These aren't just medical bills, it's the catastrophic economic downward spiral. They lose their jobs because they're too weak to work. They have to pay exorbitant transport fees to get to a distant clinic every week.
Right.
They have to buy extra high-calorie food to combat the extreme wasting of the disease. TB is as much an economic disease as a biological one. It bankrupts families.
And then there's the psychological weight of stigma.
Yeah.
The research highlights stigma as a major barrier to eradication.
Stigma is one of the most powerful engines of transmission. If a society fires people for having TB, if landlords evict them, or if governments threaten them with deportation because they are sick, people will actively hide their symptoms. They will avoid the clinic.
They turn a cough into a secret. And secrecy just gives the bacteria more time to multiply and spread below deck. I want to push back a bit here, though, and play devil's advocate.
Sure, go ahead.
If I'm a healthy listener, sitting in a comfortable living room, working a remote white-collar job, it is really easy to hear all this data and think, okay, this is objectively terrible, but it's a disease of poverty. It only affects marginalized people in overcrowded shelters or distant countries. It doesn't actually affect me.
I completely understand that instinct. It is a very human defense mechanism to try to distance yourself from a threat. But public health requires us to completely reframe this perspective.
How so?
Tuberculosis is a disease that is armed by poverty, yes. But because air is shared, a private illness inevitably becomes a public reality. You simply cannot isolate a population's air. The ventilation system of a city eventually connects us all.
That's a scary thought.
The person who serves your coffee, the person who cleans your office building at night, the person sitting next to you on the subway, if they are forced to hide their illness because of poverty, lack of sick leave, or fear of deportation, you are breathing their air.
You can't put a velvet VIP rope around air.
You can't. And that physical reality forces public health officials into a very delicate philosophical balancing act between individual civil liberties and public safety.
Because of isolation protocols.
Exactly. Because TB is airborne, temporary isolation of a highly infectious, drug-resistant person is sometimes medically necessary to stop an outbreak. But, and this is a massive ethical line that cannot be crossed, isolation is only ethical when it is paired with comprehensive care.
Right. If a health department tells someone, you are a public health risk, you have to stay in your room for a month, the state better be providing them with groceries, with rent money so they don't lose their apartment, with internet access, and with basic human dignity.
Exactly.
Otherwise, isolation isn't medical care. It's just punishment for being sick.
And while humanity is endlessly struggling to build equitable infrastructure, fight stigma, and balance these complex ethics, the bacterium is not resting. It is quietly, methodically exploiting all of our systemic mistakes to evolve.
The evolutionary arms race. Let's talk about how this patient bacterium fights back against our modern medicine. We know that viruses like COVID-19 and the flu mutate constantly, throwing off new variants every few months, requiring new vaccines. How fast does TB mutate in comparison?
Very, very slowly. TB only has a mutation rate of about 0.2 to zero point 0.5 single nucleotide changes per year. It is not a rapid shapeshifter.
Barely anything.
The reason viruses mutate so fast is that RNA replication is messy. It makes a lot of copying errors. TB is a DNA bacterium with robust proofreading mechanisms. It checks its own work when it copies its DNA, so it makes very few mistakes.
Okay, if it's mutating that slowly, why is drug-resistant TB such a massive, terrifying global crisis?
Because resistance in TB isn't the result of biological genius. It is almost entirely the result of human error. We create the bottleneck that breeds the superbugs.
Recreate them. Walk me through the mechanics of that.
Multi-drug-resistant TB, or MDR-TB, emerges because of incomplete treatments, fake or poor-quality drugs, or supply chain stockouts. Imagine a patient starts their grueling 4-drug regimen. For the first 2 months, they take the pills. The weakest bacteria in their lungs die off, and the patient starts to feel much better.
The fever breaks, the cough stops.
Exactly. But the drugs are causing terrible nausea and liver pain, or maybe their local clinic runs out of pills because of a funding cut. So feeling better, they stop taking the medication.
They pull the security guards away before the riot is completely put down.
Exactly. They killed 99% of the bacteria. But the 1% that survived, those were the toughest, the mutants that had a slight, random genetic resistance to the drugs. Now, with the drugs gone, those highly resilient survivors begin to multiply.
Oh, man.
They repopulate the lungs, and the next time that person coughs, they are exhaling a strain of TB that is completely immune to our best first-line drugs. Treating MDR-TB takes up to 2 years, requires incredibly toxic second-line drugs that can cause deafness, and has a much lower success rate.
That's terrifying.
And to make matters worse, the WHO notes that only 2 in 5 people with MDR-TB actually access treatment in 2024.
Only 40%. That means 60% of people walking around with this highly resistant superstrain are not getting the specialized meds they need. Why is it so hard to treat them? Why not just test everyone who coughs and get them with the right drugs immediately?
Because the diagnostics for TB are still incredibly complex and slow, if you give someone a simple skin test, the one where they inject a little bubble under your skin, or a modern blood test, it only proves that your immune system has seen the bacteria.
It just shows the footprint.
Right. It proves you have the infection, it proves latent TB, it does not tell a doctor if you have active disease, and it certainly doesn't tell them what specific drugs the bacteria in your lungs are resistant to.
So how do they find out?
To figure out the resistance profile, you need the patient to cough up deep lung sputum. You have to send that sputum to a specialized lab, culture the slow-growing bacteria in a petri dish for weeks, and run complex molecular tests. Yes, that takes immense time, and it requires high-tech, climate-controlled laboratory capacity that many impoverished rural or war-torn areas simply do not have.
And we already talked about the limitations of the vaccine. The BCG vaccine is over 100 years old. It protects babies from the severe brain and spine infections, but it completely fails to reliably prevent adult pulmonary TB. And adults coughing in crowded rooms are the ones driving the global transmission.
Precisely. So the evolutionary arms race is essentially pathogens testing the weak seams of the host society. Because TB is so biologically patient, it doesn't need to rapidly shift its antigens to trick our immune system. It just waits.
Just biding its time.
It waits for a patient to stop taking their 6-month pill regimen due to unbearable side effects. Or it waits for a civil war to interrupt a medical supply chain. Or it waits for a politician to cut public health funding to a clinic.
So TB is like a slow, methodical saboteur. It's not aggressively breaking down the front door of the ship like an Ebola virus. It's quietly unscrewing the hinges on the bulkheads while we're looking the other way, arguing about the budget.
Exactly right.
But this raises a major logical question for me. If we know that latent TB is the stowaway, and we know that latent TB eventually turns into active contagious TB, why don't we just treat everyone who has a latent infection? Just hit them with the drugs, cut it off at the source before the bulkhead ever rusts.
In pure epidemiological theory, that is a brilliant strategy. Cut off the reservoir. In practice, the logistics are absolutely mind-bending. Do you know how many people on Earth are estimated to currently harbor a latent TB infection?
I know it's a lot, but what's the actual estimate?
Up to 1/4 of the global population.
1/4 of the entire human race. 2 billion people are carrying this bacterial stowaway right now.
Yes, treating 2 billion people is a logistical mountain that borders on science fiction.
That's impossible.
Now, we do have shorter, modern preventative regimens for latent TB now, things like 3HP, which is a 3-month course of isoniazid and rifapentine taken once a week, or 4R, which is 4 months of daily rifampin.
Okay, that's better than 6 months.
These are vastly easier to finish than the old, grueling 9-month regimens. But to scale this globally, it requires massive funding, incredible public trust, a complete elimination of all catastrophic costs for patients, and a global health system capable of monitoring liver toxicity and side effects for 2 billion people who currently feel perfectly healthy.
Right. Convincing a healthy person to take liver-taxing drugs for months to prevent a disease they might get in 30 years is a monumental behavioral challenge.
It really is.
Okay, that ties directly into the future. We have the medical tools, the antibiotics, the basic vaccines, but traditional methods of trying to test, culture, and treat everyone are clearly hitting a ceiling. So where does technology, and specifically artificial intelligence, take us in the fight for eradication? Or, let's start there, is eradication even possible?
Let's clearly define eradication versus control. Eradicating a disease means wiping it off the face of the earth permanently, driving it to 0 cases globally so we can stop vaccinating and never have to worry about it again. We successfully did this with smallpox in 1980. But smallpox was uniquely vulnerable to eradication. It had no animal reservoir, it only infected humans. It caused highly visible, unmistakable symptoms, the pox on the skin, so it was easy to spot and quarantine. And most importantly, it had no latent phase.
Right. With smallpox, if you had the virus, you showed the virus. There were no silent stowaways carrying it for decades.
Exactly. TB can hide in the body for 30 years. It infects animals. It has asymptomatic subclinical spread. Because of this, it is currently considered impossible to biologically eradicate TB with the tools we have today.
Impossible. Wow.
However, we can aggressively control it and drive it down to endemic, manageable levels. The WHO's End-TB strategy has massive ambitious targets for 2030, an 80% reduction in new incidence rates, and a 90% reduction in TB deaths compared to 2015 levels.
And how in the world do we hit those massive reduction numbers if we can't test 2 billion people? This is where the AI comes in, right?
Yeah.
Because reading x-rays is a huge bottleneck.
Yes. The AI frontier is actually moving incredibly fast here, and it is a massive reason for hope. One of the biggest bottlenecks in diagnosing active pulmonary TB is simply having a trained radiologist look at a chest x-ray to spot the tiny cavities or the granulomas.
Which takes a human a while to look at.
In many high-burden countries, there simply aren't enough trained human eyes to look at thousands of lung scans a day. But in June 2025, the WHO officially approved 6 different AI software products for computer-aided detection, or CAD, of TB on chest x-rays.
So you feed the digital x-ray into the software, and the AI algorithm, which has been trained on millions of previous scans, analyzes the pixel gradients and immediately flags the granulomas for the local doctor.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Using AI to fight TB is like giving our ship an incredible new radar system. It can scan the entire vessel and spot the microscopic leaks in the hull instantly.
It is a massive leap forward in triage. We are also deploying genomic surveillance.
Who about that?
This involves whole genome sequencing of the bacteria. We read the entire DNA barcode of the specific TB strain in a patient. This allows epidemiologists to map exactly how a strain is transmitting through a community, who infected whom, and it instantly identifies if the strain has genetic mutations that make it resistant to specific drugs, bypassing weeks of petri dish culturing.
That's incredible, but I'm going to finish my own ship analogy here. The AI radar is incredible. It spots the leak, but a radar system cannot weld the patch on the hull, and it cannot feed the exhausted crew.
And that gets right to the peril of AI in public health. It is a tool, not a savior. AI can flag an unusual cough using audio algorithms. It can read an X-ray in a millisecond. It can translate complex medical instructions into 50 local dialects. But AI models carry severe risks of bias.
Like what kind of bias?
These models learn by looking at historical data. If you train an AI model on historical medical data that was inherently biased, the AI will confidently reproduce those historical blind spots. It might overflag marginalized communities because of skewed data sets, or it might completely miss TB in elderly female patients because historical doctors frequently misdiagnosed elderly women.
Well, yeah.
Furthermore, automation must assist human care, not replace human trust.
Because an AI algorithm running on a tablet can't hold a patient's hand. It can't sit with them and convince them that it's safe to take a pill when they are terrified of being deported by the government if they register at a clinic.
Exactly. Medicine is built on trust, and you cannot automate empathy. And the other massive hope for the future, alongside better diagnostics, is, of course, the development of new vaccines.
How close are we?
As of August 2025, there are 18 novel TB vaccine candidates in development, with 6 of them in late-stage phase 3 clinical trials. We are exploring mucosal vaccines, vaccines you inhale rather than get injected into your arm, which could build local immunity right in the mucosal lining of the lungs where the bacteria first land.
That makes total sense.
If we can get a vaccine that reliably prevents adult pulmonary TB, it changes the entire geometric equation of the disease.
But if eradication isn't on the table anytime soon, even with AI scanners and inhaled mucosal vaccines, does that mean we just surrender to coexistence? Or are we just going to accept 1 million deaths a year as the cost of doing business as a species?
Coexistence is not surrender. Coexistence is managed, minimized risk. Think about how humanity manages fire in a densely populated city.
We don't eradicate fire.
Exactly. We will always have fire. But we don't accept that buildings have to burn down. We build better wiring, we install smoke detectors, we fund robust fire departments, and we mandate fire escapes by law. For tuberculosis, the future relies on that exact kind of transformative improvement. We need shorter, safer, less toxic oral drug regimens. We need those mucosal vaccines. And above all, we have to forcefully address the root social causes that act as the kindling: crowded housing, poor ventilation, extreme poverty, and the destruction of medical trust.
So as we bring this extensive deep dive to a close, let's synthesize everything we've unpacked today. What this disease teaches us is that your body is not just a biological machine operating in a vacuum, it is a social archive. Your lungs literally carry the history of your environment, the quality of the air you've been forced to breathe, and the systemic stress you've endured.
It does. Tuberculosis proves, with devastating clarity, that individual health is an illusion if the community around you is sick. This disease is not going to be defeated by one sudden spotlight invention or a magic bullet.
It's too patient for that.
Exactly. It is pushed back by the steady, unglamorous starlight of maintenance. It is pushed back by the constant hum of good HVAC ventilation, by affordable housing policies, by accessible, free diagnostics, and by fundamental human trust between a patient and their society.
You cannot save a sinking ship by standing on the top deck and yelling at the poorest crew members who are coughing in the engine room. You survive by fixing the ventilation system. You survive by fixing the air for everyone.
Which brings us right back to where we started with those staggering numbers. The profound tragedy of a curable, preventable disease killing over 1 million people a year is that it is ultimately a choice. A society's true health is measured not only by its glittering, high-tech hospitals in the wealthy districts, but by the quality of the air circulating in its poorest rooms.
And that leaves us with a final lingering thought. Something for you to ponder as you go about your day, as you sit in your office or ride the bus and breathe the shared air around you. As climate change continues to drive extreme weather events, it is forcing mass human displacement on an unprecedented scale. In the coming decades, we're going to see more and more vulnerable populations crowded together into indoor emergency shelters, massive refugee camps, and temporary housing. As the world warms and humanity migrates, how will this ancient, infinitely patient white plague adapt to our new, crowded reality? Will our future infrastructure recognize that clean, shared indoor air is a fundamental human right? Or will we just keep building fancier AI X-ray machines while the smoke quietly fills the ship?